Oh, Canada. After 2 years off, a small but mighty grid for CTMP led to a hectic race and a ton of hometown winners. We're going to take you through everything that you need to know coming out of the Chevrolet Grand Prix at Mosport. Buckle up, because you're about to go off in the S's. Welcome to Off in the S's, where we cover everything that you need to know in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. Today, we have a special one as we are covering the recent race at CTMP, one which I was actually able to attend. There's a lot to unpack from a wild race, as well as lots of other IMSA news from the past week. So without further ado, let's get into it. Well, kicking off with some LMDH news, Pfaff Motorsports' Steve Bortolotti said last week that Pfaff is interested in running a GTP car in 2024 with the customer allocation that Porsche is believed to be increasing for that season. He did insist, however, it is going to be a wait and see approach. They did want to have some more information about detailed running costs. Of course, we know kind of what the car is going to be priced at. Porsche came out and announced that, $2.9 million. You know, not exactly not exactly pocket change, but it is believed that costs are going to be, for running the entire season, up in the $5 to $7 million range. So very good to see one of the most iconic teams right now in IMSA announcing that they're interested in taking that step forward and going up to that top category. It would be amazing to see that plaid GTP car on the grid in 2024, but nothing is guaranteed yet. We'll have to see how things unfold there. There's a good story that outlines the engine selection process for the BMW M Hybrid V8, which is, of course, their LMDH car that they're going to be utilizing in IMSA, and just how they settled on that P66 V8 engine, which had been used in DTM from 2017 to 2018. I'm going to link that down in the show notes. It's a good read, and hopefully you all enjoy it. Of course, that car is scheduled to hit the track for the first time in July. And Acura fired up its LMDH car for the first time, well, the powertrain, specifically, for the first time this week at Oreca's headquarters in France. Sportscar 365 reported that the engine is a different design to the current 3.5-liter turbo V6 that's utilized in DPI competition. And then another very interesting piece of news that was kind of filtered into some weekend notes from CTMP. There's a potential IndyCar team here that might be looking at running the second Porsche factory entry. Not really any details at all. Just a rumor at this point, but another IndyCar team potentially looking to explore IMSA. So that's something to keep your eye out for. I'm sure here in the coming month or so, once manufacturers are getting the car on the track more, they're going to want to finalize their 2023 plans more and more. So I'm sure, keep your eyes open for some more news on that incoming. All right, let's hop into some pre-race news now, starting off with DPIs. And let's just admit it, it's been a constant talking point in recent races. But IMSA has announced that they are looking at revitalizing the BOP process for the 2023 season, and of course the introduction of the GTP category. IMSA Technical Director Matt Curdock talked about bringing in new tools to help with the BOP process. Of course, confirmed entries next year include Acura, BMW, Cadillac, and Porsche. And one of these new tools that's believed to be utilized are new torque sensors that are going to be built into the new cars. This is going to assist a lot in just helping to regulate the output of the car as opposed to some of the inputs to the car with things like air reduction or air restriction, boost levels, things like that. So being able to regulate some of that output is going to help a lot. And while there hasn't been a confirmed LMH, so the Le Mans, the World Endurance Championship sort of name for the LMDH. There hasn't been a confirmed LMH manufacturer program for IMSA, but Kurdock said that they are pushing ahead with this just to ensure that the groundwork is laid for when a future manufacturer commits to this. There's plenty of talk around Peugeot with potentially rebranding it as like a Dodge type deal. Toyota, of course, they've expressed interest, but not really seriously. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that as well. I'm sure that stuff isn't going to come. We're not going to start hearing more about that until probably the off season, but it's worth noting now that and some of the new tools that IMSA is going to have at their disposal. Action Express Racing is unlikely to have two cars on the grid for the Rolex 24 in January. They will be running, of course, the new Cadillac and be affiliated with the Cadillac Factory program. Of course, you'll recall that they do have that number 31 Action Express Racing entry that they run full-time in IMSA. But then for those Michelin Endurance Cup races, they also bring the 48 iconically with Jimmy Johnson, Kamui Kobayashi, Jose Maria Lopez, and others. It's kind of a superstar team, to be honest, that they're bringing in there. But they have announced they are going to be focusing on the season-long entry unless a second car becomes available to race. Seems like that's kind of unlikely, but fingers crossed. With the announced and the obvious high demand in Q1 with Chip Ganassi Racing also running the Cadillac. They're also reported to be running one in Super Sebring. It does mean that there are going to be very limited cars available. And Jimmy Johnson, it doesn't look like he's going to have a ride, even in that full season number 31 seat. Of course, in 2022, it was Chase Elliott who was the fourth driver in that car for Daytona, really the only track that they do need a fourth driver for, and he's unlikely to slot into one of those Endurance Cup rides. But you never know. And Jimmy Johnson, I mean, he's a resourceful guy. Could he go and run with a GTD team maybe? I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. Like, he fits the mold kind of for GTD Pro, maybe a little bit closer to what he's used to racing, especially in the past with NASCAR. I don't know. We'll wait and see. Maybe he'll just take the year off from IMSA. Who knows? Keep your eyes peeled for Jimmy Johnson news. In LMP2, Fabio Schur and Dylan Murray have both been placed on probation by IMSA for the next 4 IMSA races that they enter for their actions in the 6 hours of the Glen and the accident that resulted in the number 39 Carbon with Peregrine Racing Lamborghini of Jeff Westphal to crash very heavily in the toe of the boot. Of course, you'll remember this was just before that red flag was shown for weather. This accident really did cost the number 39 entry a lot. They were planned to go up to CTMP this past weekend, but unfortunately had to miss the grid as they were unable to get a car prepared in time. AWA, which also suffered heavy damage in their Duquesne following the heavy crash at the Glen. They rebuilt that LMP3 car on site at the Glen following the race, and surprisingly did not need a spare chassis in doing so. The Canadian team then packed it all up and drove right up to CTMP and unloaded in time to race at Mosport. Of course, some big news coming out of GTD Pro heading into the race at Mosport. Vassar Sullivan has brought on Kamui Kobayashi, who is subbing for the injured Jack Hawksworth. Of course, Jack Hawksworth, he sustained that motorbike accident, it was probably, a month and a half ago or so, and he's still missing races as a result of his injuries. This is believed to be a one-off ride for Kamui in GTD, as Kyle Kirkwood had IndyCar commitments this past weekend at Mid-Ohio. All right, let's get into some Michelin Pilot Challenge news. Let's talk about that race, talk about that weekend. It was a wild week for Robert Wickens. He went from, at the Sail in 6 Hours of the Glen weekend in the Tioga Downs 120, he went from winning that race, his first race that he's won post-accident. He won that race, of course, with teammate Mark Wilkins. He went up to CTMP, his home track, on Thursday, and then had to turn right around and go back to Indianapolis, where him and his wife Carly gave birth to their Robert Wickens didn't give birth to their first child, but they welcomed their first child. Of course, then after this, he turned it right back around and got back up to CTMP for round 6 of the Michelin Pilot Challenge season, again at his home track. And over the course of the weekend, he didn't get a single lap in this car at the track. So when he started the race on Saturday, that was his first lap in that TCR car at the track this weekend. As the result of missing qualifying, of course, that number 33 did start from the back of the grid for the 2-hour race on Saturday. Before we get into the race, though, in qualifying, it was Kenny Murillo who paced that GS field, taking the pole position with a 1:22.735 second lap time in his number 72 Murillo Racing Mercedes. We're going to talk a lot about these Murillo Racing Mercedes here over the course of this segment. First timer to the series, Damien Finish in the number 14 O'Reilly Motorsports Toyota would round out the front row. Get this, just under 7.5 100ths behind. So very close there at the top. The Grand Sport session came to an early end with Dylan McIvern in that number 95 Turner Motorsports BMW crashing out, coming out of Moss Corner, or 5B. He ended up bending parts of the frame. Didn't really look like that bad of an accident, but wound up bending parts of the frame, and they were not able to participate in the race on Saturday. TCR pole went to the number 77 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai of Tyler Maxson with a 1:24.318 lap time. He edged out the very quick this weekend number 17 Unitronic by JDC Miller Motorsports Audi of Chris Miller by just over 1/10 of a second. And on race day, it was a hot and a sunny one at Mosport, and things got very interesting early on as the TCRs were very quickly being held up by the slower GS cars. If you take a look back at the lap times that these cars were running, they were very, very close. The slow GS cars and the fast TCR cars, they were well within a second of one another. So you knew going into the race that this was going to cause some problems. And it was something that kind of popped up every once in a while throughout the race. I wouldn't say that it was a terrible issue throughout, though. But with the TCRs just having such good drive and just being so much better through the corners than those GS cars, they were really able to... some of the GS traffic actually did come into play at times. This, of course, led to very nose-to-tail battles in TCR as the field really struggled to spread out until there was a safety car 20 minutes in for the Team TGM Porsche of Hugh Plum. He lost an engine and ended up having to stop that car in Moss Corner. Almost got it out of the way, just wasn't quite far enough. That led to our first full course yellow. Pit strategies on the full course yellow were mixed, with most of the cars opting to come in, but there were a handful of cars in both classes that opted to stay out and take the track position. On the restart, though, the TCR battle would rage on with the number 33 Brian Herta Autosport car, driven by, yes, Robert Wickens, making his way up to as high as second place before the drivers would pit for their driver changes. Grand Sport would, for the most part, spread out quite nicely, with the exception of two of the Murillo racing cars, who really stayed nose to tail for virtually the entire race here. When pit stops rolled around, though, these two Murillo racing cars And the pole sitter and the second place starter would end up flip-flopping on these pit stops, with the number 56 Mercedes leapfrogging the sister number 72, who was the pole sitter, and they would hold on to that lead quite comfortably until a full course yellow was thrown again for the stopped number 88 Hyundai Racing Canada entry. This was an interesting one. So you could see there was some pretty severe damage to the front splitter on this Hyundai, and was listening into the broadcast during the race, and they were kind of speculating that the noise that the splitter was making, the driver might have been concerned that it was a mechanical failure that was taking place. And for these number 88 guys, these aren't full-time runners in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. It's kind of a one-off race in IMSA for them. They do race in a Canadian TCR and GT4 series, but it may have been believed that they were a little bit worried that it might have been a mechanical failure and just wanted to stop the car and not risk anything. So that's what they did. It did bring out the full course yellow. They were cleared quite quickly, as they were actually able to drive around the track. But this really led to a heck of a final restart and some really great battles, especially in the GS category, as the top 5, when they crossed the finish line to end the race, were separated by just under 1.5 seconds. 5 cars within 1.5 seconds of each other. It was really nose to tail. We didn't really get to see a great opportunity for a pass at the end, but just to see these guys running nose to tail, it really required the most concentration that these drivers had over the course of the entire race. There were some great battles. Now, these battles may have not quite unfolded like this had there been a full course yellow in the closing minutes, which there almost was. Now, we talked about them earlier. The number 17 JDC Miller Motorsports Audi. They were battling for a podium. They were quick all weekend, battling for a podium with the number 98 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai. And they ended up making a bit of contact. The number 17 got into the turn 10 wall pretty hard. And honestly, I'm surprised that they were able to move that car. Fortunately, though, the driver was able to just get it down the front stretch enough, and there was a break in the wall that they were kind of able to hide the car in, so that we were able to maintain green flag racing. You love it when drivers really do put in that effort to try and limp their car to a safe spot and not just have a full course yellow be thrown. Big shout out to them for that. At the end, though, it was the number 56 of Eric Foss and Mark Miller that would hold on for the win over pole sitting number 72 of Kenny Murillo and Christian Simzak. The podium would be rounded out by the GS points leaders Trent Hindman and Alan Bjornsson in the number 7 of Volt Racing Aston Martin, with the number 71 Rebel Rock Racing Camaro in 4th. They were very strong all weekend as well. I really thought that they were going to be in contention for this win. And then the number 14 Riley Motorsports Toyota ended up rounding out the top 5. In TCR, it was a storybook ending for Mark Wilkins and Robert Wickens. Of course, 2 Canadians in that car. They took the win for the second week in a row, with the 2021 TCR champions of Michael Lewis and Taylor Hagler finishing half second behind them in the number 1 Hyundai. And then Parker Chase and Harry Gottsacker completed the Brian Herta Autosport sweep of the podium with the number 98 entry. Now, normally we don't talk too much about the IMSA Prototype Challenge, but there was some big news that came out of this series last week, with IMSA announcing on Friday the creation of a new multi-class sprint series to replace the IMSA Prototype Challenge. It will be called the VP Racing Sports Car Challenge, and it will get underway in 2023, featuring LMP3 and GSX cars. GSX, they're just GT4 cars, same spec as that they run in GS right now. The weekends will feature 2 45-minute races, and they will be present at 5 weekends on the IMSA calendar for a total race schedule of 10 races. The drivers that compete in the series will need to either be bronze or silver designation. There will be no pit stops. And one of the questions that really comes to my mind with this is this kind of the beginning of an announcement that LMP3 won't be up with the WeatherTech series in 2023. Now, heard some murmurs about this, some chatter. I mean, nobody truly knows at this point. It is believed that LMP3 will be on with the WeatherTech Championship in 2023. But you really got to think about this, you know. GTP is expected to increase the car numbers. We already have, I think, 10 confirmed right now for 2023. We're expecting there's going to be more cars available for 2024. We're going to have Lamborghini supposedly entering the mix in 2024. McLaren has chatted about potentially entering in 2024 or 2025. The logical division on the chopping block has to be LMP3, right? And maybe this is the beginning of, you know, get this series going, get it underway. IMSA did say that it's not locked into these 45-minute races. They might introduce some sort of an endurance aspect to it, which I'm personally hoping for a little bit. Maybe if it's just even 1 or 2 races. Will that potentially happen in the coming years? We don't really know, but it's something to think about. It's something to keep your eyes open to. It's going to be interesting to see how this series does in 2023. There seems to be quite a bit of support for it. I'll actually link a great article by Racer in the show notes, but just kind of outlining some of the support that teams already have for it. And I want you to let me know what you think of this new series. Do you like it? Let me know in the comments or hit me up on Twitter at OffInTheS's, because I want to hear from you guys and see what you think of this recently announced division. Well, personally, my favorite IMSA support series, the Mazda Idemitsu MX-5 Cup, they were hitting the track this weekend, but not at CTMP. They were supporting NASCAR at Road America. Man, oh man, they really did put on a show there. They had 2 races. In the first race, Connor Zilic started on pole and finished off what is his first win in that series in race number 1. He was joined on the podium by pretty good company here. Michael Carter in the number 08 Carter Racing Enterprises entry had a drag race to the line with Zilic, only to come up 900ths short of the victory. And Gresham Wagner rounded out the podium in the number 5 Spark Performance entry. This race, well, we saw lots of full course yellows, with one in particular in the second half of the race to retrieve guest driver Parker Kligerman's car after he was pushed off the track. Of course, he's a former NASCAR driver, if not still current part-time NASCAR driver. At the very least, he's a pit lane reporter on those broadcasts for NASCAR, especially in the truck series. So he's a very prominent face for NASCAR, and it was great to see him out there in the series. And he was doing pretty darn good. He was running up there in the top 5 for most of this race until he got bopped off the track. It was a little bit disappointing, actually, especially in the closing stages of this race. Some of the driving standards kind of started to fall off a little bit. We were seeing lots of guys, whether they were getting pushed off track. We saw some really sketchy rejoins that ended up in just sort of more incidents and more drivers being forced off track. I was a little bit disappointed to see that. But the MX-5s, I mean, they put on a show once again in front of a very big crowd there at Road America. Chris Nunes in the number 32 Formidable Racing entry. He picked up 15 positions in the race, and he finished 9th and got that Hard Charger award. Race 2 on Sunday was much of the same as Connor Zilisch dominated, leading all but one lap in the 45-minute race to take the weekend sweep. Championship points leader Jared Thomas in the number 96 finished second and was followed to the line by Matthew Dirks in the number 76 Macumbi McAleer Racing entry. There was one full course yellow that was thrown for Jamison Riley in the number 31, who got stuck in the gravel in turn 3 following some contact. This race did come right down to the last corner as well, with Zilisch leading, but behind him, instead of really focusing on getting a good run going and taking a shot at the win, they were really fighting amongst themselves for the final podium positioning. So Connor Zilisch had a bit of an easier run out of the final corner on this one. And in race 2, it was Woody Hyman in the number 82 who earned the Hard Charger Award. He picked up 14 spots in this race. If this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and make sure that you never miss an episode of Off in the S's. Trust me, you aren't going to regret it. All right, hopping into the main event this weekend, starting off with just a rundown of what happened in practice. In practice 1, it was Tom Blomqvist and Sebastian Bourdais that tied. Yes, they were in a dead heat in free practice 1. They both set a 1:05.712, with Blomqvist having set the time first, so therefore he got the number 1 position in practice. Earl Bamber ended up third in the 0-2 Cadillac. In LMP3, it was led by the number 30 JR3 Ligier of Garrett Grist, who outpaced the number 54 Core Autosports entry of Colin Braun by 0.04 of a second, and the number 74 Riley Motorsports entry of Scott Andrews by 0.2. Jenny Juncadella was fastest in GTD Pro in the number 79 WeatherTech entry. He was ahead of course, the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Porsche, who was quick all weekend long. That was driven by Matthew Gemini, and he beat him out by almost 0.4. And the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin was third, 16/1000 behind that number 9 Porsche. In GTD, it was the Vassar Sullivan number 12 leading the way with a 1:16.927. They bested the number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW by 1/10, and the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes, who was just behind that BMW. The only red flag in the session came out when the number 74, driven by Scott Andrews, got stuck in turn 2. He was able to get back going again, obviously, and did not have any damage to that car. In FP2, it was Ricky Taylor who paced the field in the number 10 Acura, having set a 1:04.919 second lap time. He was just under 0.2 ahead of the number 60 Meyer Shank Racing Acura of Tom Blomqvist, and Sebastian Bourdais was third, a further 0.3 back. So the Acuras really put the hammer down here in FP2. I was sitting there, I was a little bit worried after the first practice. I was like, okay, we have a dead heat. BOP seems good, right? And then FP2 was like, oh dear, what are we going to be in for this weekend? Is it not as close as we thought it was? In LMP3, it was led by the number 54 Core Autosports Ligier of Colin Brown, who set a 1:11.309. Number 74 Riley Motorsports entry of Scott Andrews was more than 0.6 of a second back in second place, and the number 30 JR3 entry was a further 0.2 back. Mathieu Gemini was quickest again but he was quickest in the GTD Pro class, and of course that Pfaff Motorsports Porsche, setting a 1:15.763. He edged out the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin of Alex Riberas by 0.5, who was also ahead of the number 3 Corvette of Jordan Taylor by another 0.1. Frankie Montecalvo was quickest in GTD, setting a 1:15.802 in the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus, and the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes was second, just over a tenth behind, with the number 96 Turner Motorsports BMW third with a 1:16.277 second time. With an hour left in the session, Ben Barnicoat crashed the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus in turn 3, leading to very heavy damage on that car and the session's only red flag. Well, in qualifying, that Acura speed that we saw in practice 2 really carried over. Acura secured a dominant front row lockout in qualifying, with Tom Bloomquist reeling off a best lap of a 1:04.394 in his number 60 Meyer Shank Racing Acura. Ricky Taylor was second, 7/100ths back. But the story here was the Cadillacs. Tristan Vautier was the best Cadillac, putting that number 5 JDC Miller Motorsports entry in third, but was a half second back. So that was a big gap that was there in qualifying. LMP3 pole went to Jared Andretti in the number 36 Andretti Autosport Ligier. Set a 1:13.102, just edging out Gar Robinson by 7/100ths of a second. And JR3 Racing's Ari Barlow was third in that entry. It would later be announced that the pole sitting number 36 failed post-race qualifying tech after it was found to have a non-compliant suspension component, and it was going to be forced to start from the back of the class. Mathieu Jaminet took pole honors in the home race for Pfaff, setting a 1:15.468 to edge out Alex Rabiris in number 23 Heart of Racing Aston by 0.4 of a second. Number 25 BMW M Team RLL was just 9/1000ths back of the Aston in third. Meanwhile, in GTD, it was the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus, driven by Frankie Montecalvo, who beat out the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston of Roman DeAngelis by 3.5 Madison Snow in the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW qualified third. And notably, after the heavy incident that they had in the morning, the number 14 Vassar Sullivan GTD Pro entry made it out for qualifying, and they will start in 5th position. Well, it might have been a small entry, or a small grid for this race, with only 24 cars starting the race, but it was a hectic one, and it got hectic before the cars even hit turn 1. There was not a split start utilized this weekend after it was used for the last weekend's Sail in 6 Hours of the Glen. And kind of a resulting incident from this, the Sean Creech Motorsport number 33 LMP3 on lap 1 in turn 1 spun around and collected the number 12 Lexus of Frankie Montecalvo, the pole sitter in GTD. That led to suspension damage for the Lexus. They would have to take that car behind the wall for a half hour of repairs. They would return to the race, though, albeit significantly behind. 10 minutes into the race as well, the BMW Team RLL entry lost a rear wheel, and a full course yellow ensued. On the restart, Ricky Taylor got a puncture, which immediately brought out another full course yellow. And there was cosmetic damage to the left rear of that car, but not really anything major. After they got some of that carnage out of the way, it led to an extended green flag run, and there were some really great battles in DPI over the course of this entire 2-hour and 40-minute race, as well as a great GTD Pro battle, where the top 3 essentially ran nose to tail for over an hour. It was great to watch, being there myself in Moss Corner. It was a heck of a lot of fun to watch those guys go at it. And if you have an opportunity to go back and watch it, this was a great race to go back and watch. There was a big wreck with 57 minutes to go, though, that really disrupted the flow that the race had seemed to get into, as the number 74 LMP3 got into the wall hard in turn 4, a very high speed portion of this track, after kind of a questionable move by the number 60 Meyershank Racing DPI. IMSA would investigate, deemed there was no further action, but yeah, just a little bit unfortunate for that number 74. I know we kind of give the LMP3 cars a bit of flack here for some of the incidents and the full course yellows that they cause, but this really had nothing to do with that LMP3, and it's unfortunate to see that happen. Luckily, driver walked away okay, but it was definitely a very big hit. That safety car really brought some fuel strategy into play, though, as some cars came down. Almost everybody stopped under this full course yellow, but there were a few cars that came around again and topped up the tanks later on in the safety car. So fuel strategy really being a big thing here. Again, 57 minutes to go, right on the line for lots of these guys, or over the line for some of them, depending on what you were racing out there. With 30 minutes to go, though, and after the restart, the number 10 DPI of Ricky Taylor, they were making their way back up through the field. He ended up getting spun by Earl Bamber in the 02 Cadillac while attempting a pass into turn 5. Bamber was really a man on a mission in this one. There was some great pace in that car in the race. And he was charging his way to the front. He would later charge back again, but this was more towards the end of the race and after he had served the resulting drive-through penalty for incident responsibility. The pack would again tighten up in this race in the closing minutes as Ricky Taylor sends it on the number 31 Action Express Racing Cadillac of Pipo Derani, and Taylor ends up in the turn 9 barriers, which brought out a quick full course yellow. Taylor did go in really hard here, and it was surprising, but he didn't have to come in to replace that nose. There was a very large piece of the nose that was kind of hanging on for dear life, and I was personally surprised that the meatball flag wasn't thrown for him, but he was actually able to drive around at a very reasonable pace and finish out this race. With 10 minutes to go, though, Renger van de Zande in the number 02 pulls off the move of the race here. He gets around Ollie Jarvis in traffic to take the lead, and he would charge out from there to the end for a 3.5 second victory. It's Renger and Sebastian Bourdais' third win of the season, and the number 60 Acura of Ollie Jarvis and Tom Bloomquist's fifth consecutive runner-up finish. They are, oh man, it's got to be tough being in their position. They were Ollie Jarvis, I'll talk about it in a minute. Ollie Jarvis was pretty disappointed, of course, as one might imagine, in this race, and traffic came into play on that pass as well. Rounding out the podium was the number 31 Action Express Racing Cadillac of Pipo Derani and Olivier Pla, with the number 5 and the number 02 rounding out the top 5. In LMP3, the Core Autosport Ligier of Colin Brown and John Bennett took the LMP3 win ahead of the number 36 Andretti Autosport entry of Gabby Chavez and Jared Andretti. No, they did not get disqualified from the race for suspension parts. And Ari Ballo and Garrett Grist rounded out the podium in the number 30 JR3 entry after a great battle in the closing stint for P2 with that number 36 entry. This was another one that I kind of felt bad for the LMPs. These two guys had a really great battle going on in that last stint after the full course yellow. But really, they couldn't buy a break. They got deep. There was DPI traffic that was catching them at bad times. They were catching GTD traffic at bad times as well. It kind of led them to get a little bit spread out at the end, but it was still fun to see them go at it. And there were some great battles, of course, in GTD Pro over the course of this entire race, but it was the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Porsche, the hometown car, that took a controlling win in that category with Matt Campbell and Mathieu Jaminet. They beat the number 3 Corvette of Antonio Garcia and Jordan Taylor to the line by 1.1 seconds, with the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, of course Ross Gunn and Alex Rabiris. They completed that GTD Pro podium. It was a close race in GTD, but a dominant run by the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, compiling of Romain DeAngelis and Maxime Martin. Romain DeAngelis, this is the first race that he has run at Mosport in the highest level of IMSA, and picked up a win and their second consecutive class victory in GTD. They beat the number 57 Windward Racing entry of Philippe Ellis and Russell Ward to the line by just under half a second. And Rick Ware Racing claimed its first ever podium in IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship competition in just their 5th start, with the number 51 Acura driven by Ryan Eversley and Aiden Reed. In some post-race notes, it was revealed that the number 01 Cadillac Chip Ganassi Racing entry was suffering from power steering issues throughout that race. Renger van de Zandert and Sebastian Bourdais, of course, piloting that car. They reported that power steering would work for 5 to 6 laps after a start or a restart, but then it would kind of sputter out and maybe come back on for a corner or two at random times. But especially around Mosport, man, that's not an easy track to be down on power steering. Very high-speed circuit, and very well done by those drivers, and especially Renger to pull off that move that he did in the closing laps without power steering. Meanwhile, Ollie Jarvis was caught off guard when Renger van de Zandert, of course, made that pass in the closing minutes. He thought that he had enough of a buffer to be safe from an attack when they were exiting turn 2 and going into turn 3, but he got held up just enough from the GTD Pro entry of Ross Gunn to allow that pass to take place. Definitely surprised Jarvis. Ollie was hard on himself post-race. Of course, it's been a bit of a frustrating time for that Meyershank Racing entry, but on the bright side, a 5th consecutive second-place finish. They do end up taking over the DPI points lead. And speaking of points, let's get into that right now. As I mentioned, it is the number 60 Meyershank Racing entry that leads the points there. They are 56 points ahead of the number 10 Konica Minolta Acura. A Cadillac Chip Ganassi Racing number 01 is 148 points back. In 4th place, the 02, the sister car, 190 points back, and rounding out the top 5, 274 points back, is the Wheelin Engineering Cadillac. So this is quickly turning into a 2-horse race here in DPI, but we'll see. I wouldn't quite rule out that 01 yet. They've been kind of if you ain't first, you're last approach so far this season, so we'll see if they can get something going here and carry this momentum through to the last 2 races. In LMP3, it is the number 54 Core Autosport Ligier that has 1,391 points. They are 95 points ahead of the JR3 Racing number 30, and 138 points ahead of the 3rd place number 74 Riley Motorsports entry. In GTD Pro, it is the Pfaff Motorsports Porsche with 2,056 points. They are 138 points ahead of the number 3 Corvette Racing entry, and 207 points ahead of the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. And then finally, GTD. This was a Sprint Cup only race. And in the Sprint Cup standings, it is the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW with 1,665 points. They are ahead of the Turner Motorsports BMW, who have 1,547 points, and the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, who have 1,477 points. Well, there's no IMSA going on this weekend, but there is plenty of other racing action to keep you satisfied. Formula 1 is at the Red Bull Ring. They will have Formula 2 and Formula 3 there supporting them this weekend. Qualifying can be seen on Friday, yes, on Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, with a sprint race going on Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and the race Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. The World Endurance Championship is at Monza for the 6 hours of Monza. That race gets underway on Sunday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. In NASCAR land, the trucks are at Mid-Ohio, a nice little IMSA circuit there as well, for the O'Reilly Auto Parts 150 at Mid-Ohio. That goes Saturday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The Xfinity Series is at Atlanta for the Alsco Uniforms 250. That goes on Saturday as well at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And the Cup Series goes at Atlanta on Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for the Quaker State 400 presented by Walmart. Well, that is going to wrap up our Chevrolet Grand Prix at Mosport review. We'll be back next week, though, for the Lime Rock preview as the first GTD Pro and GTD only race of the season takes place. In the meantime, though, want to catch up on the third Michelin Endurance Cup race of the season from the Glen? Well, we have all the coverage that you need from the Sailin' 6 Hours of the Glen right here. Until the next one, though, I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.